Clerk can call the roll.
Chairman Randy LeBlanc.
Present.
Councillor Harris. Is absent. Councillor Diane LeBlanc.
Present.
Councillor Mackin.
Present.
Councillor LaCava.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
All members are present. You have a quorum.
Wonderful. The record reflect we came to order at 6:06 p.m. And Councillor LaCava would like to make a motion to approve the minutes from March 4th, 2019. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. And under new matters, we have the composting resolution.
Yes.
I'd like to hear from Councillor Mackin.
All right, thank you. So, I think where this got stuck last time was partially my fault for not defining what the goals were, and partially a lack of education and awareness around what composting can accomplish and how you can go about it, how to implement it, that sort of information. So, my understanding is that the chairman has been in touch with a couple of different groups, and I thought we might have someone in from the professional side of this to talk through pros and cons and costs. So.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, and I can give some input on that. I met with Black Earth Composting when we brought the original resolution in, and what we had done was, Councillor Mackin and myself brought in a resolution that combined composting, and it was the leaves and it was the food scraps. And as we found out, it was sort of two different programs, and it was a sort of pilot program. So we made a motion to file the last resolution, and we brought in two separate ones, and one went to Fernal Use Committee, and then the portion of the food scraps one came here, and I do have a copy of that. I believe that that was distributed electronically through the clerk. Okay. And so, Councilor Mackin, if you have any comments or requests on that, or if any other committee members would like to speak, let me know.
All right, so I guess the question is that I would have of the other committee members is if, as a body, we feel that we would like the opportunity to ask questions, or if we want to send this to the full council to have all 15 of us have a chance to ask questions and learn some new information, or if we want to go straight to asking the mayor's office for their take on this, if they'd be willing to go forward. So that's I know that's very open-ended of me. To sort of throw out three different things. So.
Councillor Harris?
I think we need to focus. Through you to the maker of the motion, I do appreciate that this was split off into several different initiatives. And so if you can help me, through you to the ward councillor, the current matter before us, there was an opportunity or a proposal to bring forward and compost leaves, right? Which was brought forward and referred to Fernal Use.
Yes.
Correct. So the matter then before us now is a volunteer pilot composting initiative targeting X number of houses or where we think we can get the buy-in. I know in Ward 8 I get asked about this pretty frequently. I myself, other people have already started working with Black Earth on this. I mean, I have several neighbors already signed up. Some people are interested in, hey, could I get prorated into this, possible thing, because we've been doing it for a while. But I think what the matter is before us, if I may, and through you to the councillor who made this motion or resolution, excuse me, is can we focus on what we want to see happen, right? So
yes.
What is the goal in thinking about this? Let's pick your brain, right?
Yeah.
So what were you thinking about this in terms of a pilot program focused on volunteer number of pilot families to be able to compost their kitchen waste and their garden waste, etc. So can you elaborate on that, please?
So, thank you. My goal for this long-term, big picture is for everybody in Waltham to have access to composting for their food waste and for any other household compostables aside from the yard waste and leaf pickup. And my understanding is that the way other municipalities have reached that goal is that their public works department pays for the composting, pickup, and hauling. And that I think Cambridge and some of the other municipalities that have it purchased the composting bins for the residents to use. And it is important that you have the right kind of bin that seals and it's rat proof, so it's not people just throwing bags of really good smelling food scraps out to attract rats. And then those same municipalities have paid for the hauling and the waste takeaway. And so the options that we have in Waltham right now are all subscription programs where the resident pays themselves for the compost to be picked up and taken away. And I would like those to be transitioned to the city of Waltham paying for that as an opt-in program. I think that's what you were getting at with the pilot program. So what I'd like the committee to do is to understand what participation we would get if we offered this, what the costs would be per household, and how that would impact the cost for our garbage hauling. I think composting is a good thing to do generally, and I personally would be willing to just pay for it out of the city's budget, but my hope is that we can make the case that this is either cost neutral or cost saving compared to our current hauling programs. So that's the piece of information that I am missing, that I'm looking to get from outside of this committee, is what does the pricing structure look like? And I think that's where I fell down last time, is not coming in with solid numbers and information on that.
Thank you. I received the floor to allow other dialogue here.
Okay, I'll just introduce a point of information before I know other councils would like to speak. When I met with this gentleman, Connor Miller, they were more than willing to come in and put a presentation on, either in committee or on the full council floor, and basically educate everyone on all the programs and all the options available and the different ways to do it and the different ways that they've instituted in different communities. So I just figured I'd give that information. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Ward 7 councillor. First off, I support this. I support the idea of composting wholeheartedly, and I'm glad that it has now been broken out into two parts. I don't know that I would have sent the other one to Fernal Use, but having it in two separate parts is much easier to work with. And again, when you originally brought this idea forward, I said that the city already has a composting program, right? But we don't really have much, and you probably know more about what we do have than most. So what does our Public Works Department provide to citizens by way of composting information? Do they provide 3 or 4 vendors that have been semi-vetted, that they approve? Do they provide one vendor as a recommended, or are residents entirely on their own?
So they provide information. I believe that they have 3 vendors in a brochure that's available on their website. I don't believe any of them have been vetted through a process. I think this is something that the Public Works Department just put together as a resource for people to get started and to go do their own research to figure out which of those 3 options they prefer. And the 3 do have slightly different cost structures, and we are a little bit limited putting that information forward by the number that are operating in this region right now. So they don't pay for anything. It's all out of the residents' own pockets. It's off their own initiative. The city has done limited public awareness around it. It's just if you start Googling Waltham compost options, eventually you'll find this brochure that they've put together.
Limited is kind. So there's 3 options that are provided. And may I ask, do you use one of these, or did you go out and find your own?
I have a compost heap in my yard that I maintain myself, that I built.
Okay, all right.
And I use one of the city's recommended.
Okay. Do we have any information around how many households are currently composting using the recommended vendors?
If we do, I don't know who to ask for it. I don't think Public Works keeps that data. We could try reaching out to the vendors directly to get an idea of how many signups they have, but since they're all for-profit businesses, I don't know how willing they'd be to share that based on just an off-the-cuff request.
And my thought is, again, composting is a program appropriately under the Public Works Department, right? And that if a formal committee request is made to ask for information on the number of residents who have used the recommended vendors, you know, by year over the last however many years you want, that the Director Chasen would be in a position to reach out to those 3 vendors and request that information. So I'm going to make that request and I'll put it in writing. And how many years do we want? 3 years? Councillor Harris, to the Ward 8 Councillor, did you want to add something to that request?
When you're through.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna make that request. So
Councillor Diane LeBlanc would like to make a request, would you like that, all right?
I will give it to him in writing.
All those in favor of the request? Oh, well, we'll hear the request first, and on the request, Councillor Mackin.
I think 3 years is a reasonable time frame. To my understanding, if we go back further than that, there was a different set of vendors available. I think one of the 3 wasn't even in existence at that point. So I think 3 years is a good amount of data.
All right.
Okay, you wanna
I'll
tell us
put that in
what the
writing. You want it,
request-
yeah.
Okay, so the request was,
The request is to the Director Chasen, that he reach out to the composting vendors that that his department makes available to the citizens of Waltham, to ask them how many households in the city have used their services in each of the last 3 years. And he can define year how he wants it.
okay, on the request, all those in favor?
Aye.
So.
All opposed, the ayes have it.
So what I would say with regard to identifying one vendor, is the vendor that sent this information one of the 3 that the city has put out there?
I do not know, and I went out and had coffee with the gentleman, and it popped up at one of the, I think it was the weekend meeting, that ended up with this information, and he was more than willing to come and give an educational seminar. I guess they do it frequently, and he was, question and answer period, educate everyone on basically the possibilities.
In my concern, educational seminars are wonderful, and vendors who have an opportunity to make money are very willing to do them. When you single one out over another, you perhaps put us in an awkward predicament when in fact this goes out to bid. You've perhaps already given one entity a preferred position, right, to learn more about the city, to understand who you are. You know, I can't, and I got the stuff in, I got the stuff by email. Most of these companies, you know, they've got their presentation packages. So I guess another request I would have is that the clerk of the committee reach out to these 3 vendors and ask them to provide a comprehensive presentation package of information to be provided to each of the 15 councilors, and we can ask for however many packets we want.
On the request. On the request, so this is where I was going with my follow-up question, and thank you for bringing this and making, I think that the current data helps us understand adoption and interest. But before we, I think, ask a vendor to come in, I would prefer that we do the work in this committee to actually form the kind of proposal and questions that we're looking for, because they all could be a little bit different model-wise. They also could be a little bit across the board, right? So back at the beginning here when we were starting to talk about it, you know, what is the participation was the initial question. That could be answered through the request of each of these vendors. And they could just give us raw numbers of the participation of our municipality, not names, not regions, anything like that. I think we have questions beyond cost, right? What is the impact to our garbage hauling current costs? I think we have to do a request. On your request, I would ask with the council at large, accept a friendly amendment to that request, to possibly bring in Director Chasen to see if he's looked into the impact of what composting could bring in terms of cost analysis, savings to the city. Because if we're gonna bring a vendor in, we'd want them to answer, I think, a formal RFP before they spoke to any of us. And full disclosure, I mean, I'm a customer of one of them, but they don't know me from a hill of beans. They don't know me from a hill of beans, pardon the pun about gardening. But it's the truth. So I'm wondering if we couldn't bring in Director Chasen and further shape this in terms of the kind of cost modeling that we want to do before we ask for any more input from these vendors, and then shape possibly an RFP that we could send out and do a vendor selection from.
You know, and I think that's good. I think that makes sense. My request wasn't to have vendors in.
Okay.
My request is simply for them for all three of them to provide us with their materials, so that we all, and I was thinking it should go to the full council, but maybe at this point, to your point, we're still doing the work in committee. If we get the presentation packages, a copy for everybody in committee, so that we can look at it and understand it, and as you said, they may present differently, and you know, we may see things in a different way by looking at 3 different sets of materials. That will help us to move forward. So this is just kind of a straightforward request for their information, so that this committee can review it. Then I would see yours as you make a separate request, and we'll get the director back in.
Thank you for re-clarifying the request, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could those materials, excuse me, be shared with also Director Chasen? Because I'd like him to come in and do some of this work with us, because I think as we shape this, we really have to understand the public works model. We have a lot of trash tons, right? We score high in trash tons. So understanding how this could actually reduce cost and pay for itself would be very important, and perhaps looking at those vendor-based materials would help us. So if we could include to share that not only with this committee, but Director Chasen, I think that would be helpful then.
Okay, and do we want hard copy, electronic, or do we want it both? Because I know some people don't like hard copy.
On the request, I understand the point about predisposing us to one vendor, so I will definitely support this request. It seems to me that if we request them to send a hard copy, the clerk's office might be willing to provide paper copies to councilors who need them and just forward the rest electronically. So maybe people who want one could raise their hand or could email the clerk offline, just to cut down on paper flying around the city, weighing us all down. On the request, that's all I have to say at this point.
So then the request would be for the clerk to reach out to each of the vendors with and ask for whatever presentation information they would like to provide to this committee, and to get it in hard copy and electronically, so that it can be shared with committee members and Director Chasen as they wish to receive it.
Okay. On the request, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it.
That's all I got.
Putting that in writing?
I will.
And then,
Another one?
another one, I believe. Councillor Harris, did you have a request you wanted to make, or did you want to hold off?
I'm gonna hold off until those materials are.
I'm gonna take the second request. Sure. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the matter?
Just have one thing to add, if I may. Thank you. So I did pull up the comparison that our Public Works Department has up on their website, and the 3 are City Compost, Bootstrap, and Black Earth, and they have their pickup costs put out on a little table comparison. And I just want to caution people who are starting to look at this that my hope is that at doing a volume, either through a pilot program or eventually when we go through citywide, that the cost would not line up exactly with what it costs per individual right now, that hopefully we could negotiate some kind of discounted rate. Black Earth does make that explicit in their costs, that the more people in a community subscribe, the lower the cost goes. And my hope is that once we get to the point of doing an RFP, we'd be looking at not $10 per week per household, but some lower cost over the entire city. So I just wanted to raise that before anybody starts doing a back of the envelope and coming up with numbers that might end up wildly out of line with where we're going.
Thank you for that. Any other on it? Councillor Mackin would like to lay the matter back on the table.
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye. Yes, have it. Could the clerk provide us with any updates on the request we made last week?
Let's see, Mr. Cazaza replied to your request, and I sent that out to everyone about the ACO, and Mr. Forty replied this morning regarding his permitting software. Those are the replies I have to your request from last week.
Okay. Any updates?
I'm gonna move to take the consent decree stuff off of the table that Mr. Cazaza responded to.
Councillor LeBlanc, move to take the matter of the consent decree off the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it.
All right.
Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. So I had it in my stuff, I'm not putting my hands on it, but I recall it was a rather pithy response. So does the clerk have it?
Yeah, hold on a second.
I have it.
Okay, could you please read it?
It says, Assistant City Clerk Bizarre, it is my understanding that the consent decree will be in place until there are no more sewer overflows. Sincerely, Steve.
So next week they'll have my application to become city engineer. That isn't what we were looking for. Certainly, and I believe I'm on this resolution, right? And this is a situation where, and the chairman of this committee knows all too well, we hit businesses with the infamous I&I fee, right, that Waltham has become known for. And when it comes to small businesses who are looking to open up shop in the city, it can break them. It's a pretty tough pill to swallow, especially if you're not expecting it. The chairman has handed me a copy of the resolution. Oh, and there I am. And the consent decree goes way back. And it's not unreasonable to get a legitimate update on where we're at. Are we 2 years away from the end of this? Are we 5 years away from the end of this? We should have a sense of that. You know what? There are some people out there who believe that this should go away, that we're done, and that this is just a way to make money. I don't know what the answer is. You would think that the Commonwealth would come back and say, okay, you're done. And let me read the note. Could we communicate with EPA and what we need to do? Yes. Yes, that would be, we still have an EPA, or has that been abolished? That's, we could communicate with EPA, but so shouldn't the city engineer be communicating with EPA and the state folks? So you're talking about the federal government or the state government? Okay, all right, so the state level. Can we communicate directly?
There are two.
Right.
There's one with the EPA and there's one with the state.
Right.
There's two agreements or something.
So the one with the state is the ACO?
Yeah.
And the, right, okay. And then the EPA,
I think One's an administrative
The
consent
administrative
order, and one is a
consent order.
consent decree, I
But they're both related.
think. Yeah.
And they came together and again, we should really have a better handle on where we're at. And if we're not there yet, what do we need to do to get there, and what's the plan? Is it 2 years, is it 5 years, is it another 25 years, right? So, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what do you think? Another basic request?
We could
Or
put
do
a
you-
basic request, and we could actually ask, and I know the MWRA had a little bit to do with it, and the DEP, I think it was the one that we had to come up with a game plan, which was the fog ordinance and the I&I, come up with a game plan to get to the next step. I don't know that we're getting great communication out of the engineering department as to where we are, what we need to do. Would we ever ask the engineering department for the contacts to be able to contact them to see if we could get this jump started, or would that be out of line as a committee?
It would probably be deemed to be out of line and overextending. I don't know, Mr. Clerk, what do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah, what do you think?
I think you always have to be very careful not to get into executive functions. This is how I'd say that.
Okay. So related to this is a matter that the chairman just mentioned that I believe he may have worked on.
But you could ask the engineer how many discharges it had
Well,
each year, if that's the underlying thing.
And we could ask him to appear and ask our questions. And questions that aren't answered, we could ask him to get the answers, right? But again, related to this is the fog ordinance. The fats, oils, and grease Citizen Input Committee did an awful lot of work, made their recommendations. It went to the Ordinances and Rules Committee. Those recommendations were taken very seriously, most of them incorporated into the ordinance. The ordinance has been sent off to the law department. And Mr. Clerk, you know I've communicated with you in particular on this matter numerous times to say, where is it in the law department, and do you have any sense of where it is?
It's in the law department assigned to a lawyer?
Do we know which lawyer?
Yes.
Okay. And which lawyer is that?
Sewell, I believe, Sewell.
Okay. And I believe that there was some, is this one of the matters where there was some confusion around who had it?
Yes.
Okay. So, this was sent over a long time ago. Has the Ordinances and Rules Committee sent a second request or third request, do we know?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So maybe somebody on Ordinances and Rules could follow up, because again, they're very much related. All right, so then I would make a request to call in Mr. Kazaza to answer questions related to this matter. And I would invite him, Mr. Chairman, do you want him at the next committee meeting, or do you want to go 2 committee meetings out? I don't know what your plans are.
What's the date of the next meeting?
April 1st.
First on the line after that.
Let's do the first. We can do the first, yeah.
Okay, all right, so that's the request, that the city engineer be invited to the next meeting to discuss the matter.
Okay. Well, there's a sense of
On the request,
On
on
the
the request,
request.
can we get more specific? Because I personally think if we're giving him time to prepare, he should prepare and come in so that the questions are satisfied, not to cross over into the executive side, because that could just be an open-ended set of questions. So through you, Mr. Chairman, to the maker of this request, the goals of the I&I Advisory Committee, had like to seek solutions that will enable the city to correct the I&I problems with the least economic impact on residents and businesses. What's our action plan? 2 would be to help and protect public health, the environment, and local economy. What's our action plan? And to seek fair and equitable means of implementing the I&I plan. What is our action plan? To me, those are just simply saying, for I&I over the next 4 to, let's say it's a 5-year plan. What are the goals and what is our plan to initiate? I mean, to me, we can have these conversations about I&I all the way through, but either we transparently ask the question and we get the answer back, and either that's acceptable to the constituency, or there's hot spots, if you will, around the city where we're all gonna have to sacrifice to take care of those little hot spots where there's problems. I mean, I have some on the south side. So I guess on the request, can we get more specific in terms of the kind of questions that we wanted to come in and answer? Because we're heading into a budget season, we're heading into these things, and I personally like to support whatever he's trying to achieve, if it meets the need.
And on, the maintenance was one of the hot spots on there. They have a new jet truck, if you wanna be listening to questions, that could be one of them.
You know what, I mean, this is a big issue. I think it should be conveyed that he should come prepared to answer any questions that a councillor may have related to the status and our plan for getting to the end of this situation, to include addressing the recommendations made by both citizen input committees, right? By the I&I committee and by the FOG committee. Does that do it?
It does. What I would like to see is FY plan, because we're heading into a budget season and we're gonna have these questions all over again. And if there's work to be done budgetarily to meet what we think are constituent needs or addressing hotspots, we should get into the input of that, so that we're not just bringing them in and asking questions and then possibly having to work back and forth. Let's work towards a goal that can be actually funded and improve the process.
So I will put the request then in the context of both the I&I committee report and the FOG committee report.
Councilor Mackin, have any question?
Thank you. The other piece of this report from 2014 is about the number of sewer overflows. Can we ask him to also send the number of sewer overflows reported per year from the issuance of this report in 2014 through the close of last year? Just the number, and if he has any additional information he tracks, that would be helpful, but the request is for the number of overflow events.
Okay, so to include the number of sewer overflows in each fiscal year.
Yes.
In each city fiscal year, 2014 through the current year.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right.
You've all heard the sense of the request, on the request. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
All right, I move to lay that matter back on the table.
Councilor LeBlanc moves to lay the matter back on the table. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it, the matter's back on the table. And the agenda is light. If we have anything else we want to take off the table, we may. Seeing none?
What?
Oh, Councilor LeBlanc.
So I would like to take your repaving resolution from the table.
Councilor LeBlanc would like to take the paving resolution dated,
There's a lot of paving resolution.
4/23/2018?
So this is the one to eliminate 1725.
okay, dated 4/23/2018. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Councilor LeBlanc.
So where are we on this?
Where we are on this is, it's tabled here, and we did a request for, to Attorney Azadi to update us with we had requested her, she was in here and we went through some of the draft language, and she was going to give us the draft ordinance for the, be an ordinance change, not a zone change, so for an ordinance change. and we have not received a response, and was it last week, Councillor LaCava sent a request? And we did not get a response, and I sent an email today, CCing Joe and Attorney Casati on it to see if we could get that request back. Because if we had that, we could move forward with this. And then the other question was, I asked you if we had, I don't know if you got a chance to do that today, the notes on what we went over in committee, because if we don't get a response, we could seek to look into writing it ourselves and sending it over to them for review, if we're not getting any response from them.
So related to this topic, a number of years ago, you know, not looking to achieve the same thing that you're looking to achieve here, Mr. Chairman, but related to this topic, Director Chasen was asked, how is it that the city notifies the residents of a particular street that their street is going to be repaved? And I don't remember the exact answer, but the gist of it back then was that, well, as soon as they knew, they tried to get the word out to them. But there was no sort of formal standard operating procedure at that time where residents received a written notice, whatever, 3 months in advance, 6 months in advance, a year in advance. And the request of him at that time was that he put something like that in place, right? Because it makes sense. If you know, if you've got your list of streets that are gonna be done in a particular year with your, you know, your Chapter 90 money, and you've got that plan, it makes sense to notify residents as soon as possible, because if they then want to do work,
Right.
it's good to coordinate, right? So that they're not coming to the city, you know, 3 months after or 2 months after you've just repaved the street. So I guess I would like to make a request of Director Chasen, for him to, you know, provide us in writing, with what the current policy is with regard to notification to residents when the city is going to repave a street. How much advance time do we give them, and what does that letter look like? So I'd actually like to receive a copy of the letter, and I'll clean up that request, but that's the gist of it.
Okay, we've heard the gist of the request. On the request, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it.
I move to lay that matter back on the table.
Move to lay that matter back on the table. What do we have on the December tree? If we wanted to pop, I think Councillor Darcy has something on the table. Yeah, right here. If we wanted to ask that question at the same time, I don't know if you wanted to get some input from Councillor Darcy.
So I move to take the matter dated September 25th, 2017, sewer backups and Eastview Park resolution from the table.
Councillor LeBlanc, would you like to take the matter from the table? All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it.
I move to hear from off committee member.
Should like to hear from our member. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Councillor Darcy, the chairman has just asked me to, since you were standing there and since we were talking about sewer issues, to take this from the table, the Eastview Park resolution. Do you have any new information on that? Have you heard from the city engineer?
The engineer was working on it, and I think it's been addressed, but I think this committee should invite him in to, or ask him for written comments concerning the sewer issue.
So since we're having him to come in to the next committee meeting to talk about the consent decree, would you want him to address the matter?
I'm not on the committee, so I can't
Right, so do we
request
wanna
that.
have him be prepared to answer questions at that time, or do we
The
just want
bottom
a
line,
written update?
the bottom line, there was an obstruction, a rock in the sewer line, and I believe they've cleaned it out.
All right, so then I'll just ask him for a written update.
Yep.
All right, so we'll, the request is to the city engineer for a written update.
For the sense of the request, all in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Move to lay that matter back on the table.
Councilor, lay that matter back on the table, all in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. That is back on the table. What's the wish of the committee?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Councilor Mackin makes a motion to adjourn, all those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. We adjourn at 6:46.